Hi everyone, today I'm going to speak about a topic that nobody else speaks. No supervisor would ever tell you this, and as a matter of fact, if you quote me on this, I may say I didn't say that at all. The topic today is how you should proceed with working on your dissertation if you don't have time, if you're pressed by time and you only have a very limited period of time to work on your dissertation. I have to say there are some strategies, but it's always better to allocate enough time for the dissertation and your research. That being said, sometimes it's just a matter of forcing it as quickly as possible to make sure that you have something, or just failing. So hopefully you are never in such situation, but if you are pressed by time, let me explain what you need to do. The first thing you need to do is to build momentum. Building momentum is very important because it gets you excited. And how you build momentum is by starting off from the easiest chapter to be developed. The easiest chapter to be developed is the methodology. Methodology is just a set of rules that you should apply to your research. And very often, if your topic is somewhat similar to a topic that has already been published, you can expect that more or less you would have a lot of touching points. You can borrow some ideas about how the data was collected. You can borrow ideas about how the data was analyzed. So when I say borrowing ideas, I mean actually borrow the practices rather than the content itself. The methodology can easily get you started, and it will show you that you're progressing. You can see that you're progressing, you have some pages written down, and then it will hopefully make you feel a little bit better about the fact that you're moving forward. As we are started and we have the momentum, now it's time to dive into the chunkiest section of them all, which is the literature review. And you have been wasting a lot of time on conducting a literature review. And I know people try to cover all articles relevant to their topic, and that's a huge time waster. I do have a video about how you can proceed with conducting a literature review quickly. So if you haven't seen it, make sure you have a look at it. It's a time saver for sure. But let me just quickly say what you need to do when it comes to addressing the literature. You need to pick several articles that have been cited by a lot of other authors. And you can easily see that in Google Scholar. There is a number of how many times this article was cited. And article has been cited a lot and it's quite relevant, but also quite new. Then that's your best bet to know that this article is perhaps one that you can draw a lot of insight from. So you do need a couple of articles to have a better idea of what has been done on the topic. It's always a good idea to read every single paper that they have referenced, but in this case, we're not going to do that simply because we don't have time. The next thing you do after you complete the literature review, which I assume would at least take a couple of days, is to look at your findings. Okay, for the purposes of this video, I assume that you have already collected the data. There is no shortcut when it comes to data collection. It does take time, especially if you deal with primary data that you have to collect from real people. But assuming that you already have the data, now it's time to analyze it. If you have quantitative data, the analysis is fairly quick and straightforward. Cleaning up the data would be time consuming. It's the other way around if you're using qualitative data. The analysis would be fairly long. It does take time. So I'm going to tell you how you can make sure you proceed with the analysis much faster. For example, if you have interview data and you have recorded your respondents, don't transcribe the whole data. You can listen through the data and pick some major points. Then listen again and check whether other respondents have also touched upon these same points. Then it's considered to be a theme, something that occurs across all interviews. It can be a different type of theme. It can be a small theme, it can be a cluster of themes, or it could be an overarching theme. So this is basically depends on how often this theme has emerged and how central this theme is to the discussions or to the conversation that you had with these individuals. Again, don't transcribe everything, but try to spot these themes. As you have a bunch of themes, make sure you create a cluster of them and put a certain label. There is different variables leading to, let's say, a particular activity. So you'd have the activity that this informant decided to conduct based on these different variables. And then these activities can be clustered again. There may be a bunch of activities which are conducted for the sake of achieving a specific goal. Maybe for the sake of growing a business, maybe for the sake of establishing somebody's business as a sustainable business, or you name it. It could be many different things depending on the topic you choose. So now you have created a visual, basically a bunch of boxes and arrows that are showing a certain type of clustering. And then this is the starting point of the actual analysis. You can see whether these variables have a new relationship with different types of other variables, something that has not been discussed in the literature before. Or you can see whether the clustering of certain activities into actions makes some particular sense for the phenomenon. Therefore, by following these steps, you would know the major themes, the major ideas that have been communicated to you by your respondents, and you can proceed with the discussion chapter. The discussion chapter is by far the most difficult chapter of any dissertation or any research project. I don't want to discourage you. This is a very important chapter, and there is a recipe, there is a code, and I'm going to show you how you can crack that code. Typically, the discussion chapter starts off with discussing the major findings from your findings chapter, and then trying to mix this up with the literature, trying to identify whether there is anything that has been conflicting with the literature you've read, and you may explain why there is a conflict between your findings and what you've read in the literature. And explaining this would provide you with enough room for claiming contribution to literature. Or maybe this model that you've created from your data can be something that is added to, let's say, a theoretical model that you have observed. But maybe this theoretical model that you already found in the literature has, let's say, there is a missing relationship that you identified in your own work. So this is enough to claim, again, contribution, theoretical contribution. And then you may go ahead in claiming some practical contribution about how the findings you generated can inform the practice of professionals in the industry or in a given field. So now, only after you finish the discussion chapter, it's time to go and spend some time in the introduction chapter. In the introduction chapter, you'd highlight the phenomenon, you'd highlight the real world problem that exists. You would not highlight the theoretical contribution you're making just yet, but you'd highlight the problem that motivated you to go and conduct this research in the first place. And only then, in the end of the introduction, you'd quickly state what methodologies you're using and what kind of theoretical and practical contributions you're making. After you finish with the introduction chapter, you jump at the end of the dissertation and try to write the conclusion chapter. The conclusion chapter is fairly straightforward to write. It may take you a day or maximum two if you're, again, pressed by time. Hopefully it's going to take you longer because you'll have that time to spend on this. But the conclusion chapter is all about highlighting the relevance of your work, stating that you've managed to address your research questions or the hypothesis that you stated at the very beginning. And in the conclusion chapter, you would also have areas for future research. You would outline what else needs to be done so that researchers can have a better idea of that phenomenon. There is a video about limitations that I posted not long ago. You may go and check this out because something that you touched upon quite heavily on in the conclusion chapter are the limitations of your work in regards to anything that was not done in terms of anything that should have been done in terms of exploring new variables, exploring new contexts, etc. To save time, you should also do the referencing while you're writing your literature review, while you're writing all the chapters of your work. Don't leave this in the end because referencing can take a while, especially if you didn't keep track of all the sources that you've been using. A good idea here is to use a software such as Mendeley or EndNote, which will help you to do that much quicker and more efficiently than doing everything manually. After you complete the references, a good idea would be to consider what would you put in the appendix section. The appendix section is something that very easily can convey to your supervisor or anybody reading your research work that you have put decent amount of effort. And by including all the charts, all the tables you've generated in this section of your work, then you would convey clearly that you had a very methodical approach to conducting the research. So all of the tables that you generated, all of the graphs as part of your data analysis, you may put here. If you're doing qualitative study, you may put more representative quotes in the appendix section as well. Ultimately, this adds to the perceived value of your work, even though you may have finished it very quickly. There is a way to finish things quickly, but also make sure that you've reached a good quality, good standard. And hopefully this is the case. This video is about finishing the write-up of your research quickly. However, you should know that there is always a risk of something new, a new issue popping out. That's why it's much better to start early, to allocate enough time for each chapter of your dissertation, and be prepared to discuss your ideas with your supervisor. That being said, sometimes because of things that are beyond our control, we may be forced to finish a dissertation quickly. There is a way, you shouldn't be discouraged, you can still do it. The most important aspect is not to be overwhelmed by the amount of work that you need to do. You need to break down a dissertation or a research project into pieces. You should regard every single chapter as a separate project, and this will help you to move forward quicker, rather than being overwhelmed by the quantity of work that needs to be done. I hope you found this video useful, and let me know if you have ever been in a situation in which you had to complete a project very quickly, and hopefully at the end you got some amazing results and you were surprised by how efficient and effective you could be when the deadline is just around the corner. This is everything for today. I'm gonna catch you in the next video, and peace out.